What's up, real life? I'm so glad to be starting a new series with you today. It's called The You Effect, and it's all about influence. It's all about the effect that we can have on other people. And my best friend in the whole world, his name is Amir, and he pastors at our Conway campus. And he was the type of guy who every time he walked into a room, the temperature changed. Like, he was just this fun guy. He always had a good time. He could make you laugh, and he would do crazy stuff. And he was just a joy to have around any and every time. It didn't matter where we were and who was around. He was just the life of the party. And I'm sure you know people like that who they always have a good time. Maybe they always have a joke ready to make people laugh. Maybe you have people around you who are just always encouraging and always nice, always kind of honoring. And you just feel good when you're around them. Or maybe you know somebody who's just a hard worker. They don't really think about it, but when you're playing sports with them or you're playing music with them, and they're always ready and they just work hard. You see them working hard at their schoolwork, and they just do it. Maybe you have other people in your life who are on the other side, who are just negative all of the time, right? They always have a negative perspective about everything. Somebody who just complains about everything that's going on in their lives. Maybe you have somebody they're constantly mean and nagging and always pointing out the things that are wrong. And whether you have the person who has the positive outlook or the person who has the negative outlook on life, they have an effect on us. And oftentimes what you'll see is that people who have a significant amount of effect on other people, they do it and they're not even thinking about it. Maybe they don't even realize that they have an effect, or maybe they're not thinking about it. It's just how they go about life. And that's the tricky thing when it comes to influence, when it comes to having an effect on other people, is that we oftentimes don't think about it, and that we need to become intentional about using our influence. And you may be somebody who influences an idea that comes really easy to you. Maybe you have a position or a title, some kind of an authority in a club or an organization or on a team that allows you to influence other people. Maybe you're somebody who when you talk, you give advice, you say, hey, I'm going to do this, that people listen. They do it. But I know a lot of us are on the other side, and the idea of influence feels like 1,000 miles away, that nobody listens when I talk, that nobody follows when I go in a certain direction. I try to get my dog to do something at home, and he doesn't even listen. We can identify as somebody who doesn't have any influence, zero effect on other people. But the fact of the matter is that we all have an effect, whether we know it or not. And we're going to look at a story today in John chapter 6 about a boy who showed up one day not thinking anything about influence and would have a major impact on the lives of a lot of people. In John chapter 6, verse 1, it begins this way. It says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed in healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming toward him, he asked of Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he had already had in his mind what he was going to do. And so you can imagine this, like Jesus is taking his disciples and he sees this large crowd of people. We know of 5,000 here in just a minute that we're going to see of people coming up. And he knows the need that they're going to have, that they are going to get hungry at some point. And I'm thankful that Jesus is thinking about that. I was like, man, Jesus knows when I'm hungry and I start to get a little hangry. He knows that's where these people are headed. And he asks the question, and then Philip chimes in. And he asked something that probably would be the same thing that I would ask. Philip answered him and said, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. He's saying, Jesus, that is a lot of happy meals that we're going to have to buy to feed all of these people. I mean, he's thinking about the finance. There's a lot of money we don't even have. Not even the logistics side of it. He's like, this is a lot of money. How are we going to do this? And then another disciple chimes in. He says, another one of his, verse 8 and 9, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How far will they go among so many? So apparently one mom was on it. This would be Megan. She would be ready with our kid. Are you going to listen to Jesus? You better take you a snack with you. You need a little meal to take with you. And so he shows up with his little bit of food. And Andrew's like, hey, this kid's got a little food, but it's not going to make any difference. And then we see Jesus go into action. In verse 10, he says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There's plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had already had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. And the people saw the sign Jesus performed. They began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. And so when we look at this passage and we ask the question, who had influence in this passage? Well, certainly Jesus had the maximum amount of influence, right? He's the one who performed the miracle. And so we see Jesus held an enormous amount of influence. Really, he had all the influence, and he allowed other people to take part, if we're being honest, right? Then we see that the disciples also would have had some influence. They're the ones who noticed the kid, and we see that they took part in it. And so we know they had some influence. But a third one would be, what about the boy? Did the boy not have influence on the situation as well? What we see is that it wasn't how much that the boy had that allowed him to be influential, but it was his willingness to allow God to use what he had that made him influential much more than he could have ever imagined. He certainly wasn't showing up thinking that he was going to be used to impact every person that was there. This was not somebody who was well known, right? He wasn't on the stage. He wasn't doing anything that made him more valuable than somebody else. We don't see any characteristics about him. The only thing that we see is that he was willing to be used. And in doing that, he was able to be influential to a lot of people. And the thing that you need to understand is this, is that you can have more of an effect on people than you think. You have a greater amount of influence than you even realize. We need to change the way that we see influence. We need to stop looking at the lack of things that we have in our lives, the things that we can't do or the things that we don't have. Because it's not about doing more or having more. It's about being willing to be used by God, being willing to give up even the little that we have to be used by God to have an effect on other people. See, it's about choosing to believe that we can be used even if we don't see it. Even if we think it's unbelievable in our minds that we can have an impact on our friend group, that we could have an impact on our section of the band or our teammates or our siblings or our classmates. We need to change our perspective to say that God can do it, that he can use a little bit that I have to make an impact on other people. And there's a few ways that we do that. Number one is we identify who around us we can make an impact on. Who are those people around us that we're close to, that we can have an influence? The second thing is we start to look at their lives and we say, well, what do they need? What is something that they need in their lives? And the third thing we do is we say, what can I do to help meet that need? What can I do to help meet that need? I know at this time, right now, there's a lot of students out there. You have a lot of classmates out there who you would consider a friend. And the thing that they need most now is a little bit of encouragement. They're feeling lonely. They're feeling by themselves. They're feeling disconnected. They need to know that somebody cares about them, that somebody is there for them, looking out for them. And so for you, it might be a simple call, a simple text message, just to say hey and check in with them. Can you imagine the influence that we could have if we just made this simple shift in how we see influence? If we stop looking at the lack of things that we have and start just allowing ourselves to be used by God. God is the one who has the power to change. And I pray that we would be people who would be willing to allow God to use the little bit that we have to be used to impact other people. Miss you guys. I love you guys. Can't wait to see you again. Be blessed.